Two major attacks with one thing in common: the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant has claimed responsibility for killing dozens in Tunisia and Kuwait, leading to questions about just how far ISIL can spread a year after it created its caliphate. ISIL expanding. This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. One day, two countries, more than 60 casualties. This is how ISIL ensured the end of the first week of Ramadan, the holy month in Islam, will be remembered. Civilians attacked in Kuwait and Tunisia, specifically targeting people that ISIL refers to as infidels. This was the attack in Kuwait City, a suicide bomber attacking Shia Muslims in their mosque. The explosion ripping through the congregation just after Friday prayers. 27 people, including the attacker, were killed. More than 220 others were injured. It's the first time a mosque in Kuwait has been bombed. And then Tunisia, where a gunman opened fire on tourists on the beach and in their hotel in Sousse, a resort on the northeast coast. Most of the 39 people killed were British, Belgian and German. In response, the Tunisian government announced plans to shut down 80 mosques it accuses of, quote, spreading venom. Now, if you want to add another layer of potential significance here, it's almost exactly 1 year now since ISIL first announced its caliphate. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was officially declared the group's caliph and the leader of Muslims everywhere, at least that's what the group claimed. At the time, ISIL said it already controlled most of the region from Diyala province in Iraq to Aleppo in Syria. An ISIL spokesman warned that as its empire expanded, any governments or organizations it encountered would be nullified. So what we're asking 1 year on, and with these two new attacks, is has ISIL done exactly what it said it would? Let's bring in the panel for today. In Tunis, we've got Ahmed Galloul, who is a member of the Shura Council for the Ennahda Party. In London is Lina, director of the Carnegie Middle East Centre in Beirut, and rounding out the panel in Tel Aviv, Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi, a fellow at the Middle East Forum and specialist on Islamic State. Welcome to all three of you. Ahmed Galloul, can I start with you in Tunisia? And I'd like to focus in on the Tunisia attack first of all. Soft targets, foreigners, infidels, as ISIL would say, during Ramadan. Is this well, it looks like a departure in style for the attacks that ISIL usually does?
Well, I mean, there was a precedence. I mean, we had an attack to Bardo Museum that is targeting tourists. Now it became, I mean, yesterday's, if I could allow myself really to call it as a crime, and it is a crime. I mean, it's hard to call such crime as soft targets, but it is a crime. People just who are our guests coming to our country to enjoy themselves and finding themselves being killed. What do you think it is that ISIL wants to do? Just push himself to be killed. What
do you think it is that ISIL wants to do in Tunisia? Because through Iraq and Syria, it was about taking back control, or not taking back control, taking over areas, controlling new parts, controlling oil fields and all these things. What's its game in Syria? I shouldn't say game, that's a terrible word to use, but what is it doing there?
We have in Tunisia a model. Yeah, we have a model. We have a model where Islamists are one of the leading powers of this model, of this political model. This model can be, if it is successful, and I hope it will be, an alternative to what ISIS might provide as a successful Islamic banner. In Tunisia, we can have an alternative to ISIS, and we can be successful. This alternative can be successful. If ISIS is to succeed in Tunisia, then it will have to put this model down, to break it down, to make it unsuccessful, to prove that only radicalism is the answer to whatever crisis young people are going through and our societies are going through. I'm not sure whether we can really tie what happened yesterday to ISIS, but we have the ideology, and this is more dangerous than tying it organically to to the organization or to decision makers of ISIS to perpetrate such a crime yesterday in Tunisia. What is more dangerous is that we do have people who believe in the ideas of ISIS and who would tie what they do to ISIS, and this is more dangerous. What ISIS would look in Tunisia, the utmost is to put this model, put this potential model, which can succeed, to break it down and to say, no, there is no other alternative for our young people, for our societies.
Okay, Lina Khatib, let's bring you into the conversation. Some early thoughts from you. What do you think about what Ahmed was saying there about whether we tie it directly with ISIL or not, or just with an ideology?
Well, I agree with what he said in the sense that perhaps the biggest threat to the ISIS project, which is to establish the so-called caliphate, is the model presented by Tunisia, because Tunisia is a country that is actually protecting religion through ensuring that the political system remains secular. And this is a revolution in terms of approaching religious tolerance in the Middle East. So obviously this is something that ISIS does not accept. And unfortunately, because of several economic and social and political grievances within Tunisia, ISIS has a relatively fertile ground for recruitment in the country. So it's a bit of a complex situation because Tunisia is the country that has the most potential to be democratic, and yet the grievances that exist on the ground mean that there are people there who are sympathetic to the ISIS ideology.
Tell me about those grievances. What are they?
Well, one thing that is key is that there is little trust in Tunisia in the police force. The security sector is still unfortunately engaging in some unethical behaviors. And this means that citizen trust in the security sector is low. When you have low citizen trust, you have low intelligence gathering capacities, because the people will be more likely to collaborate with the police if they trust the police. So as a result, the security sector in Tunisia is a bit weak. Coordination between the police and the army is not as good as it should be. The country does not have a de-radicalization program that addresses the social and economic grievances of youth. There is a lot of unemployment, for example, and also the country still does not have a national security strategy.
Okay. Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi in Tel Aviv, let me bring you into the conversation now. I'm interested in what Lina's been saying to us about this lack of security, lack of trust in security apparatus, no de-radicalization. Do you think that's a thing, or is it an ideology problem more than that?
I think it goes beyond the question of simple grievances. The reality is there's long been a jihadi, a fertile jihadi scene within Tunisia. It existed underground, of course, during the Ben Ali regime, but it manifested itself in the numbers of Tunisians, for example, went to Iraq during the Iraq War and part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and so on. And then, of course, after the revolution, there was more or less an open market, which is where, of course, Ansar al-Sharia began making a name for itself, and the Katiba ibn Nafi that is linked to it and linked to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. But at the same time then, with the rise of ISIS, you had many more Tunisians going to join this phenomenon in Syria and Iraq. Partly that was encouraged by Ansar al-Sharia, because initially in 2013, when ISIS first emerged, they were there were signs of sympathy within Ansar al-Sharia for ISIS, and that they had more validity in their arguments over Jabhat al-Nusra in that dispute. Now it's a bit more complicated. With the declaration of the Caliphate, Ansar al-Sharia tried to play it both ways, of being both pro-ISIS and pro-Al-Qaeda, although of course that's ultimately incoherent. But the point is that ISIS now is trying to make an inroad into Tunisia, trying to make itself the leading voice of jihad. And then the way to do that is to claim these mass casualty attacks and try to siphon off people from Ansar Sharia and the Katiba ibn Nafi, as has already happened, but to keep siphoning off, and then eventually the end goal to make ISIS the sole voice of Salafi jihadism inside of Tunisia. Whether that will work for certain is still an open question for debate. But it's been pushed for a while on social media, this expansion into Tunisia.
Okay, Ayman, I'll come back to you in a moment. I just want to go back to Ahmed Ghalul in Tunis to ask about what's being done right now. Our other two guests have talked more about the bigger picture. I want to ask you about what's being done now. You know, you've got the government shutting down mosques, which it thinks are a concern, and are promoting venom, I think was the word it uses. What does that really do? Does that have a short-term impact? Will it help in the short term, do you think, or would that actually upset people more than anything else that their mosques are being closed?
Well, in my view, my personal view, shutting mosques will not help, really. It will just push these people to go underground, and then it will make it more difficult to the government and to the security forces and also to the society to deal with such a complicated phenomena. And also, it will tell ISIS that, yes, you've done something and you've pushed them to make another mistake. It will help ISIS or to radicalize the tensions here, and basically we will have more young people believing in their ideas. So shutting mosques, restricting freedoms, I don't think that is a solution. This strategy has been tried during the time of Ben Ali, and yes, these grievances, they go back up to down to the time of Ben Ali, and doing the same thing, it will basically recreate the same phenomena and make it stronger, especially that during this period, the state itself is going through a transitional period where it is, as a state, very weak. It doesn't have political legitimacy. The army, the security forces are also very weak. The economy is very weak. So it is not the way to combating, if we could say, terrorism or radicalism.
Okay, Ahmed, I'm going to interrupt you there. Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you there.
In Tunisia,
because I'm conscious of the time, and we've got a lot of other things to talk about. Whilst you've been talking about mosques, it makes me think, of course, we must address Kuwait here as well, what happened in the mosque there. Lina, why don't I ask you about that? Again, this is another different sort of attack from ISIL. I know that Shias are a target for them, but still, attacking Muslims in a mosque on Friday during Ramadan?
Yeah. For them, it's justified because they regard anyone who has not pledged allegiance to ISIS and who is basically outside ISIS territory, not just physically but ideologically, as being a kafir, an apostate. And this means their killing is justified. And Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had actually issued a statement calling upon his supporters all over the world to escalate attacks during the month of Ramadan against the kuffar, the apostates. So this is how they're justifying this kind of action.
It's quite twisted, isn't it? Really? I mean, it's sort of, you know, some of the things that you hear a lot of Western leaders saying is that, oh, this is a twisted form of religion and they're not doing another form of religion. And the way you describe it there, I mean, it's just... Sorry, I sound a little bit shocked here, but it just seems incredible during Ramadan as well.
No, we have to remember that the ISIS ideology is still in the making. ISIS does not follow any particular religious marja'iyya, a religious reference in Islam. It rejects the four sects of Islam. It basically makes up its ideology as it goes along, and this makes it more dangerous because it makes it unpredictable. There is no reference that ISIS has apart from anyone who's not with us can be killed justifiably. This is the only thing that is fixed, which means that they can be very innovative, unfortunately, in their ways of terrorism.
Ayman Jawad, what do you think Kuwait will do? How do they react to this thing? Because it's a different sort of attack, and they're talking tough about it, but I wonder the steps they take and whether they want any outside help at all.
With regards to the Kuwait government's potential response, I think that's precisely what ISIS is interested in. So the actual targeting of Shia in Gulf states and the Arabian Peninsula, that fits in with a call that goes back to November 2014 by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi after you had the creation of these so-called new provinces in the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in Saudi Arabia, which is now coming under this Wilayat-e-Najd designation, and then also in Yemen. And the idea is to attack the so-called Rafida or Rawafid, as referring to the Shia, And then through the government response, which inevitably has to be some kind of increased protection, say for the Shia communities, ISIS will then exploit that to say, oh well, look at these hypocrites. They claim to be Muslims, but they're protecting the infidels, the Rawafid. They're referring to the governments as tawaghit or idolatrous tyrants. Also, I think they would hope that in attacking the Shia, and if they provoke this perception that the Shia can't rely on the governments to protect them, then hopefully in some way they're drawing in Iran and aggravating sectarian tensions further. So right. Just most broadly, what happened in Kuwait fits in with that strategy of Sunni-Shia tensions to provoke them, and then to say to Sunnis that we're the only ones who can truly represent you in government and in your interests.
Okay, let's just pause for a second.
The Kuwaiti government might ask for outside help.
Ayman, let's just pause for a second. Again, I'm conscious of time, and I want to start tying all of this together, because we've talked about Tunisia, we've talked about Kuwait. I want to show our viewers now a map just to highlight the whole idea of ISIL's expansion in the last 12 months. Let's have a look at this. Remembering ISIL already controlled large parts of Iraq and Syria, but it's been expanding into Iraq's Anbar province, other areas in Syria which have got oil reserves. It's opened up an important front in Egypt's Sinai province as well. You've got armed groups in at least 17 countries which have pledged allegiance to ISIL in some way or the other. Libya is at the forefront of those. Armed groups in each of its three main geographical regions have aligned themselves with ISIL, making Libya a key training ground. Ayman, I will come back to you, just as I did interrupt you there for a moment, to start tying all of this together. ISIL has just, when we look at it on that map, the steps it has made in the face of a coalition which has been bombing it in parts of Iraq and Syria, and all this talk about degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL, and look what it's done.
I think one has to be a bit careful with not the official expansion. Yes, I think the international stage is primarily where it's taking place, but one has to be careful, what exactly is ISIS in each of those countries? And I think one way to measure it is to see, okay, can these ISIS affiliates abroad develop the same kind of governance model that ISIS established within ISIS Central, that is, Iraq and Syria? The answer to that is it was mainly in Derna and Sirte in Libya, and those are significant because it's quite clear that ISIS dispatched operatives from the center to help cultivate these affiliates. However, that's already readily in doubt because ISIS was driven out of Derna and its governance structure was dismantled. And in Sirte, that this is the only place where you're seeing viable ISIS governance outside of Iraq and Syria. So one should be a bit careful about ISIS on the international stage.
Okay.
There's a big emphasis on expansion because it's precisely what they want in their propaganda. And as for Syria and Iraq, just to say briefly, there's a lot of ebb and flow that's going on there. I don't buy the idea that ISIS is winning or that it's losing. I think people too readily jump onto either assessment based on the latest developments that take place. Loss of Tel Aviv, oh, ISIS must be losing. ISIS takes Ramadi, ISIS must be winning. It's a lot of ebb and flow, and it's going to be a long war.
Ahmed Galloul, let me come back to you in Tunisia to pick up on this point of what Ayman was saying about ISIL affiliates, because that's probably what you're sort of dealing with in places like Tunisia where this quote-unquote expansion is happening. How dangerous do you think they are? How close do you think they are to the quote-unquote real ISIL?
I don't think that in Tunisia, at least, they are close to achieving an expansion. That is because we do have an alternative that is a successful alternative. What ISIS is doing is that it is recruiting on a basis of being a successful story. We do have another successful story, which is a different story here in Tunisia, and we can still hope in the future. Unless this story is a total failure, then we will not have ISIS expanding here. So in Tunisia, I think we are still a bit away or far, even though we are at risk of having ISIS expanding in Tunisia. We still have hope even in Libya. If the conflict, if the parts of the conflict would sit down and reach a consensus, then I think ISIS will withdraw from Libya. what happened is that we have an old regime, an old state regime in the Arab world that is falling down, and there is a real struggle in the Arab world and the Muslim world for a new regime, which needs a new political consensus, which needs a new concept of a national identity, of a new concept of what we might call political consensus as a base for the modern state or for the national state in the Arab world. And we need either to allow politics to dominate the public sphere, otherwise we will have violence which will dominate that. And then we will be speaking about ISIS expanding in Tunisia, and not only in Tunisia, because yes, Tunisia is the door to Africa, but it is also the door to the Mediterranean. Yeah. So it is not an issue which is local or regional, it is an international issue. I think, and I believe, that we do still have an example which can be successful. We can tell a successful story. The problem is that this successful story is very tied to what is happening in Egypt, what is happening in Syria, in Yemen, and in Iraq. So that's what makes it more complicated.
Right.
We have a lot of frustration in our Arab world and Muslim youth, and we need to give them some hope to the future. We need to tell them a successful story that is different from the radicalism and different from just people going to kill each other and then to kill themselves.
So, Lina Khatib, how do we do that? Because if ISIL is peddling a story of it being a success, how does any Arab country, you know, we've heard about Tunisia there, but how does any country counter that with their own successful stories when there is, as we've just heard, chaos in so many other places?
Well, a number of things can be done. A key thing is reducing sectarian tensions as much as possible, because ISIS preys on sectarian tensions in the region. In the Gulf in particular, there is a sizable Shia minority that is constantly facing at least sectarian rhetoric on part of some of the governments in the region. So Gulf countries in particular need to start engaging in measures to increase coherence. For example, I just heard that now during Ramadan in one of the Gulf countries, there was a common prayer for Sunnis and Shia to pray together. Now, for an outside observer who doesn't really, know the difference, maybe this is not so significant, but for Shia and Sunnah to pray together is a symbolic move. So more of these kinds of initiatives should be taken by governments. The other issue, of course, as I mentioned, security sector reform. Many countries in the region think that strengthening the security sector means increasing its technical capacity and increasing crackdowns and throwing more people into jail. But what is actually needed is improving civilian-military relations and engaging in de-radicalization programs that pay attention to the core issues that drive people towards radicalization in the first place. And the other issue is controlling the religious sphere, but not in the way that Ben Ali used to in Tunisia by completely cracking down on it and basically weakening it. In fact, you can strengthen the role of religious clerics and unify Friday prayer sermons, for example, and make sure that there is a space for tolerant religious rhetoric to kind of happen outside of the direct control of the state. So you regulate it, but you don't crack down on it.
Okay, Lina, let me interrupt. Ayman, I got 60 seconds left. Final thought from you. What's the #1 thing that we need to counter this?
Oh God, that's a difficult question to say. I think, well, okay, just off the top, I mean, seeing this very form of media, sometimes I think we have to be a bit careful about too readily buying into ISIS claims of expansion. Sometimes I think there needs to be a bit more critical analysis of it.
Yes.
Because if we just take it all at face value, that kind of does their work for them. But that's all I'm going to say. Sorry.
Yeah, well,
I don't want to be offering grandiose.
Probably have a whole other show to discuss that, wouldn't we? Ahmed Jawad Al-Tamimi, Lina Khatib, and Ahmed Galoul. I thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for watching. As always, we want to hear your thoughts. Many ways to do that. Contact us on our programs page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Hop on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. There I am at Kamal AJE. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.